Well, hello, everyone. I'm Teresa Kittredge, and I am so excited today to have our guest, Savannah Barrett, with us. Savannah, welcome. Good to see you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, and I want to just start out with a quick bio on you because you're such an amazing person, and I want to share about you. So, Savannah is the co-founder of the Kentucky Rural Urban Exchange. She is the exchange director of Art of the Rural, and she served on the board of the Center for Performance and Civic Practice, the Art of Community, Rural South Carolina, and the Robert E. Gard Foundation. She has widely published essays and interviews. She holds a master's degree of arts management from the University of Oregon and is an alumnus of the Muhammad Ali Scholars for Peace and Justice at the University of Louisville and from the Kentucky Governor's School for the Arts. And we're going to have to talk more about all of that because I just think that's such an amazing program you were in. Also, Savannah previously guided programs for the Center of Community Arts and Cultural Policy, the Louisville Visual Arts Association, the Oregon Folklife Network, and the Paul Paletti Gallery. Savannah's a 12th generation Kentuckian and was raised in Grayson Springs, where she co-founded a local arts agency in high school. She's a proud steward of 6 acres of her home place and currently lives in Louisville. And Savannah and I met, I was thinking about this, in 2014. So I think not too long after you joined Art of the Rural. And we've known each other but haven't gotten to spend a lot of time together over the past 5 years probably. So just really excited that you're taking the time to do this with us today, Savannah. So welcome.
Thank you, Teresa. It's an honor to be in conversation with you. You've been such an important person to me in my career. So thank you for inviting me.
No, right back at you. So we'll start. Just one thing we like to start our podcast with is to sort of share a lesson that you've learned from your grandmother or another important older woman in your life and an inspirational woman, and then you can help me talk about how we say grandmother in Kentucky.
Well, I say mama. I have a mama and I have grannies. In our family, we alternate between grannies and mamas. So my mama, her mother was my granny green. My mom is my daughter's granny. I will be a mama if I'm lucky. So that's how we do it down here. And I've learned so much from my mama. Helen Barrett's just, one of my dearest people in this world. And um, I'm really lucky to still have her. And for my daughter to get to learn from her great grandmother. I think the most important lesson that I've learned from her is really about the value of family land and what you can learn from being in place. I know that I'm a 12th generation Kentuckian. I know that Sylvia will be the 7th generation to steward our home place because she tells us often, and she always has had a way of kind of telling a story of people who came before us as she tells you the story of the land, as you experience the land that I grew up on, you like experience the long history of stewardship. And it really served to connect me not just to understanding how to identify, a hickory tree, but to understand the stories of my great uncles and my great grandparents, my great great grandparents, and why they loved this place, what they did there, and how those stories are sort of part of my responsibility and accountability to that place. And why, for me, nothing in this world is more valuable than that stretch of land, because it's something that um, I think, though a pretty complex inheritance, it's something that can't really be taken from you. And it's pretty singular in this world, to know who you are because you know where you come from and you know who your people are. It's a pretty rare gift.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I just think it's so amazing that you've been able to take that forward. I just think that's incredible. And I know we're talking about rural women and rural today, but why don't you just say again, what's your connection to rural? I know there's so many different connections to rural, but tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So you've heard a little bit about where I'm from. And I think one of the things that for me is really core to being a rural woman is a deep connection to landscape. Um, you know, as I was telling you in the story about my mama, like growing up on a landscape where my ancestors' impacts were visible and their stories were sort of cited, really gave me an early commitment to generational progress, or the idea that my purpose is rooted in the people that I'm from and that my accountability is to the future of that place. Regardless of whether or not I live there and spend all of my days there, I know that the way that I walk in the world has a direct accountability to people who are in that place more than anywhere else. And I think that's a sort of rural value that guides me that is, for better or worse, like an unshakable part of who I am. So that's, my physical place of origin. Grayson County, Kentucky is a big part of my rural identity. But, my rural identity, I think, has been made and remade many times over because I, as a first generation college student, left when I was 17 for the first time. I really didn't have an example before me of what it was going to mean to go outside of my home community and pursue an education. I didn't know the ways that that would like complicate and in some ways sever my relationship to my rural community and family. Um, and sever, like, I'm not out of communication with anyone that I love in my hometown, but, um, it did separate me in a way not by my choice, but by the ways that I was perceived in my with some people in my family and community that, like, I could never really go home again and be the same person that I had been before. And that really started to be clear after a couple of years in college, and I think catalyzed a whole moment of examination of what, being from rural Kentucky meant to me, and what my future might be there if I were lucky enough to be able to sustain my life in the place that I loved, which, isn't easy in arts and culture. It's easier today than it ever has been, but wasn't easy when I graduated from college in 2008 and tried to go home the first time. So, I think my rural identity has really been evolutionary and iterative, and has been informed by the place that I'm from, but also by so many places across Kentucky with the work of Rocks. We've been hosted in 18 communities across the state. We work with folks from 80 counties across Kentucky, and coming to really know and care about them has, just for the way that I am, made me also know and care about their places. I think all of that time spent, especially in communities in southeastern Kentucky, um, and and honestly, in a lot of communities in Minnesota. I've been really lucky to be mentored by some incredible women in Minnesota, who've introduced me to that geography and the native places that share that geography. Um, and I think over this career that has been focused on being of service to rural, that rural identity has been expanded. I see myself more than anything as a Kentuckian.
You talked about college, and we're going to talk about work and all that fun stuff. But tell me a little bit about the Muhammad Ali Scholar Program. Share about that with people.
Sure. So I think I was a sophomore at the University of Louisville when the Muhammad Ali Scholars Program launched. I was in the first class. I think there were 8 of us. I was the only rural person in that program. And, most of the folks were people of color from around the world. One of my cohort members was from Barbados. And we went to Senegal and Manchester and Liverpool and Paris together, really trying to understand the international experiences of racism and the slave trade. And it was just an absolutely formative experience for a little country girl from Litchfield, Kentucky, to really examine what an intercultural context looked like in the South and to really get to the bottom of my own privilege, which, I had a lot less economic privilege than many of the people who I was in that cohort with. And um, it wasn't easy for me to see my life as necessarily harder than someone who had, always had wealth and access, and whose, father ended up being a program officer at at the Kresge Foundation. Like,
Hmm.
it's hard for me to look at my family and to look at his and to see my enormous privilege. And it wasn't until I was standing at the upper balcony at Gorée Island in Senegal, looking out over the ocean at the place where hundreds of thousands of enslaved people left Africa,
Wow.
and
Yeah.
heard this guttural moan come from someone who had become a very good friend of mine below me at that gate, that I realized that regardless of our experience in this life, that there's an ancestral benefit or burden to who we are. And it just, that moment of realization, I think, changed my path and helped me understand that to do progressive organizing work in the South in this moment, you have to hold geographic and racial equity in the same hand, and you have to find a way to build powerful intercultural networks that can circumvent the power structures that have limited their collaboration in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I wanted you to talk more about that because I just think what an experience for you. When you think about everything you've done since then, I see that really leading to your work. But tell me about you and your work and your community engagement. I know you've touched on it, but talk a little bit more about you and where you're at.
I was actually just writing a little bit about this, about the roots of the rural urban exchange work that we do and how we've
Yeah,
used cultural strategies to build relational infrastructure to do just what I was talking about, right? To help people find the confidence and social capital they need to be effective leaders in their communities, which sometimes is just about building skills, but sometimes is about building skills to move around existing power structures that just don't welcome you into the space. Um, and it really was a combination of two very distinct but connected organizing traditions that I was really lucky to find early in my life. One of them, back to my mama and my mama, comes from my home community. My mama and papa were active in the UAW when I was a kid, and I just have very formative memories of sitting on the courthouse steps watching my mama organize a picket line against
well,
Vermont American for what I don't know. I actually think it had something to do with NAFTA when I think back of it. And, at the same time, my mom ran a fraternal lodge because she worked for an insurance company in rural Kentucky. And a portion of the premiums that the community paid went into a fraternal fund that if you formed a lodge around, then you could do things like send all the kids to camp or
mm,
build someone a new house when their house burned down. And I learned a lot about rural organizing from those experiences, fundamentally that people need each other, that they long to be together, that they long to do meaningful work together, and that to get them to do that, you need to have some good food. Ideally, you've got some childcare, and you've
right.
got to make it fun. You've got to let people be joyful. You don't need to make the work of civic life feel like work. You need to let it feel like neighborliness and a little bit of hustling in the 15 minutes at the end of the meeting. So that's what I learned from the place that I was from. And then I was so lucky to become an all East scholar in college and to be taught by Ann Braden, who is just one of the most incredible, white women in the Southern civil rights movement. Um, and I think she showed me what being an ally and an organizer could mean in this
Mhm.
context. And, she also, I think her life was really clearly illustrated like what that sacrifice would look like. Ann Braden came from a well-to-do Southern family in Alabama and chose a life that like led to her being tried for sedition, helping a Black family buy a home in Southwest Louisville and not far from where I live right now. So I think it was those two experiences that contributed to how we built Rux. And, the co-founder of Rux, Josh May,
Yeah.
also had similar experiences. His parents had been community organizers in McGoffin County, not in like a civil rights or social justice oriented way, but just in the same way as mine, in organizing neighbors to do the work of civic life together. And both of us had trained at the Highlander Center. And I think both were really interested in trying to figure out how to advance sort of racial and geographic equity at once.
Yeah, Josh, I had the good fortune of meeting Josh and in Savannah, as I said, in 2014, 15, and I also had the honor of getting to spend about 18 months back and forth in Southeast Kentucky, which was some of the most amazing and uh, meaningful work that I did in my career. And I remember, they talk about Minnesota nice and I was like, yeah, but in Kentucky, I mean, it's like not, do you want to come over to lunch or do you want to go out to lunch? Why don't you come over to lunch and stay over? I said, just for the most welcoming. I just had the most welcoming experience in Kentucky and just met the most incredible people who sometimes didn't see how incredible they were. So I love that, the work that you're doing. I think the rural urban exchange has been such a success and so important. And can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I want people to know more about the work you've done there and some of the, some of your takeaways, some of your successes that you've really found from that work.
It's amazing to have this conversation with you, Teresa, because you were there. Rex wouldn't have made it this far without the support of Rupri, without your mentorship. I'll never forget going to the cafe with you in 2014 and you asking if I'd like to come on as a contractor with Rupri and start to support the work that y'all were doing to help build a backbone for SOAR, and how generous y'all were in letting me support that work um, in a pretty unconventional strategy. Josh and I were a ragtag bunch. The folks that we built that steering committee with in 2014 and 2015, we were all young Kentuckians from different backgrounds, from all over the state, from different sectors, who shared a vision for what we thought this place could be and what we thought it needed to be to keep us here. And that's about it. That's about all we had. We had 2 pennies to rub together and a lot of vision and a lot of chutzpah. And we were really lucky to be supported by a few institutional leaders who really came alongside us and gave us a lot of room to figure it out on our own, which I think is what mentorship really is.
Mhm.
Though I couldn't have known it then. And I sometimes felt sort of hemmed in, but, dictating for Chuck. But
Mhm.
I learned so much from sitting alongside you all. So I have to say that before I answer your question in any
Yeah,
real
and
way.
I would just interrupt you too on that I circular mentorship is critical and you were a huge mentor for me too. So please know that. Like, you don't need to put up with that stuff. So we were good. We were good for each other. I would definitely say that. You were super good for me. And just I mean, what an amazing small initial investment that was to build this incredible program you have, which I just think is a model for the nation. Just incredible. So,
Well, it wasn't small to us. You know very well that we
mhm.
had $500 that first summer to move 34 people across the state and feed them for 2 3-day conferences, which mostly looked like tents in the yard and donations from farmers. And we were really strategic about making sure that we recruited a couple good chefs along the way. Um, but, we couldn't have made it this far without that support. And it's funny what you say about, not, I think maybe all I'm good for is telling people that they shouldn't put up with that kind of stuff. But
Yeah, but it's
that is
important.
maybe the core role of a Kentucky woman
That's
is
right.
that she will let you know that you shouldn't put up with that. So, I should first say, as of course you know, that I've been working with Art of the Rural now for 13
Wow.
years full
Wow.
time.
Yeah. Oh
14
my
years since I
gosh.
started writing for Art of the Rural. And you know what I have to say to rural women across the country, regardless of whether or not you live in your hometown or your rural place, regardless of whether or not you're still looking for how you get to live your purpose in relationship to who you are, is find your people.
Mm, yes.
And remember that finding your people is not a static act, that it has to happen over and over again because you're going to keep growing and changing and finding yourself. And that, you know, every person that you find is a potential skeleton key to some part of yourself that you need for the next leg of your journey. Meeting Matt Fluharty in 2012 in St. Louis. Well, I didn't actually meet him in St. Louis. I saw him talk. I chickened out of introducing myself at the conference that I'd flown across the country to attend to meet him. But meeting him was one of those moments of finding your people. And so we've been doing this work together now for more than 13 years. And it was in that environment where Matt and I and this incredible group of artists and culture bearers from across the country were really trying to figure out how to create the support structures and to resource rural and native artists and culture bearers to do work that was relevant and accountable to the places that they loved. It was in that context that I was able to start the Kentucky Rural Urban Exchange with Josh May back in 2014. Josh was the communications director at Apple Shop at the time. And at Art of the Rural, 2014 was the year of the rural arts. We decided to declare it the year of the rural arts and to have a massive campaign trying to drive national arts and cultural organizations to really recognize the vital, iconic contributions of rural people and places. Along the way, we started to have these conversations with RUPRI, which is the Rural Policy Research Institute, about how arts and culture could play a meaningful role in their work. So we're both looking at the sort of field implications of rural in the arts and culture space and the field implications of arts and culture in the rural policy space.
Hmm.
And I think from that really rich environment, it was clear to me that Kentucky had been really held back by its lack of statewide collaboration, that too few Kentuckians were plugged into the networks that could really change our future in a way that um, would bring progress and thriving to our communities. And so I think Josh and I early on were looking for a way to really like move those big impacts forward. We wanted Kentucky to be a place where we could live our dreams.
Hmm.
And to do that, we used all the cultural strategies and organizing strategies that we had learned from across the state because we understood that, like us, as working class, rural, first generation college students, that we couldn't just jump in and move right towards the impact. That in Kentucky, we didn't need to just build the conditions for us to achieve our mission, which was a more connected and collaborative Commonwealth, but that we also had to create the conditions for everyday Kentuckians to participate in that mission, which meant we had to build their skills and confidence to see themselves as leaders. And we had to build their network so that they could use one another as resources to help hold the space for the work to happen when there weren't resources for it. And we then, along the way, would also have to build the institutional demand for institutions to be responsive for this work. In places like the South, you have to do all three at the same time. So I give all of that, sort of pretext to telling the story of Rux because we understood that you were going to have to do all of those things to do one thing here. So we built Rux as a place-based cultural exchange because we knew that the shortest distance between two people was a story. And if you wanted to build power in Kentucky, you had to build it based on story. And then we built it as a leadership program because we knew that we had to build the skills and capacity of folks to participate and to see one another and themselves as leaders. And that was really going to be the only way to flatten the racial and economic and geographic divides that had really kept us apart in Kentucky. And then over time, we built it as a distributed leadership network because we knew that the folks that we were building this with needed an opportunity to practice the leadership skills that they were gaining, to become facilitators, to become practiced in building a curriculum and applying it to their community context. And then we realized that these folks needed financial support to get their ideas and projects off the ground. So we started a microgrant pool and have had so many incredible partners come along with us and pass their own funds through Rux because we can just reach communities that they can't. And now we're moving to a place where instead of continuing to invest all of our resources in this relational leadership program, the Rux cohort, which, for the past 12 years has been moving around to 3 communities in the state and doing deep place-based exchange where a host community hosts this cohort of 50 to 75 members for 3 days for an experience that they have designed for our benefit. Instead of continuing to do that and put most of our resources and staffing into paying for that experience for that 50 people, we've realized that we have 400 members and 200 partners across 80 counties. And now we can invest directly in them to create that RUX experience in their own communities and invite one another. We're really excited about Lucky 13.
I love it because it is sort of one of those things that you have all these people who've experienced this, and it is that whole, how do we take that leadership and really seed everywhere and leverage all that knowledge and commitment. You've gotten to do a lot of things. I mean, you're a young woman, you've done so many different things, but what do you think, what stands out as some of the most rewarding things that you've gotten to do in your life, in your career? When you think about that, what are some of the bigger highlights for you?
I have been so lucky, so blessed to be invited to share the stories of people in Kentucky and the stories of rural people with communities across the country, across the world. Got to be on some really humbling stages. And those moments are really meaningful. But the biggest reward of my life has been to figure out how to do this work with Kentucky people. It's just, I think it was a big part of my purpose here on earth. I think I've maybe done my bit. Who knows? As it continues to evolve, whether or not I'll still be the right person to guide the work of Rux. But I think that the way that we're moving towards investing directly in the membership to do this work wherever they are is like 1,000 flowers blooming at the same time. And that's really our sustainability plan, is to not plan for succession, but plan to be everywhere all of the time, all at once, which I think is a really beautiful path to sustainability. The other thing that comes to mind is that we bought this 200-year-old former mineral springs resort in Grayson Springs. It's this site that's adjacent to my family land. It's 102 acres. It has this tumble down inn on the property that needs a heck of a lot of work. And I bought it with my husband and 8 of our closest friends and family members from down there in Grayson County and from around the state. And it is just the hardest thing I've ever done in my life to try and figure out how to do this work in my home community. It's just so different. And it's really challenging to try and do it like on the side, on top of the enormous work of my career. But it's also so meaningful to be able to try and do something that my community has wanted for so long. And this spring, we're about to announce this 3-event series. It's going to be the first public events that we do at the property. It's going to be messy and imperfect. Like, what is parking going to be like? I spent an hour on the phone with my cousin yesterday being like, will you bring your flatbed bed and your raised like dozer and just try and help us figure it out? So that's what it's going to be like. It's going to be really messy. But it's such a joy to get to try something and let it be imperfect and see what comes from it.
Yeah, I think sometimes you get the best results out of that. And that's how you learn. You learn what works and what doesn't. And you can plan forever, but sometimes you just got to jump in. I've seen photos that you've had, and it just looks absolutely incredible. So, talking about home and Grayson County, did you know what you wanted to be when you grew up? Or did you think you'd be doing what you're doing now? I mean, like me, we both have some similar civic engagement education from, our moms and grandmas and grandpas. So just curious if, did you have a plan?
Well, I mean, I don't know if a person could know that they wanted to be like a cultural organizer, is I guess the best phrasing for what I do now. Like I certainly didn't know that those words could go together when I was in high school. But I think I did know that I wanted to use just the power of people coming together to change the world. Like I think I knew that.
Mhm.
Um, it's so funny to think back about my mom's fraternal lodge, but we had a youth chapter. We met on the playground while they were having their meeting inside. And we, after our second meeting, went in and asked for a budget and said, if we're going to have this youth chapter, then we need some money. And we split it up between a series of ice cream parties and going to Holiday World and going to camp and like basically programmed the whole summer. And then we asked for some more money. So pretty early on in my life, I think I learned the value of like what could happen if you just are bold and ask for something and get some folks behind it. I think I was so lucky to grow up in a small community where people really try to meet kids where they are and support their dreams. It's, I think natural for young people to kind of punch up in their communities and assume that their communities don't support them. It took me a long time to really reflect back and think about folks who I know didn't agree with me politically, who probably thought what I was doing um, was wild and silly, you know, but who still sat there every week while I taught the like middle school creative writing workshop, and those kids, read their super goth poems, and we put them in little chat books that the cooperative extension office printed for us. People really come up to meet you where you are and support you in small towns, and that's such a gift. So while I didn't know exactly how I could do what I wanted to do, I think I did know what I wanted. And I knew that I had had such a healing experience through the arts, and that it had helped me really be proud of who I was and find my own voice. And I wanted more than to continue to leverage my own voice. I wanted to create that opportunity for other people.
That's that's so you, Savannah. It is so you, and it is that whole piece. In small towns, everybody knows everybody, and I think what I love about rural and small communities is we all have to work together, and that's the one thing that today is tough because it's so polarized, and it is polarized, and you have to figure out how to work together. But if you don't know each other, it's really hard to work together. So I think that's an advantage that we really have in some of our small communities. I'm on a couple boards where I am, definitely an outlier on what I think. But you find places, it's where you can agree and where you can work together, and that's what I think really brings me joy. And I know it does bring you joy. And it is one of those things that, I mean, people support each other, and that's what we need to focus on. I think the change that, not to get on a soapbox, but to get on a soapbox, the change that I see in this country is going to be in our communities where people have to get back to basics of figuring out how do we support each other and what can we do to help each other. And you lead such a busy life, career-wise, family-wise. You're going to be doing this summer, you're programming with this huge initiative. What do you do for fun? How do you step back and recharge also? Tell us about that.
I have got to get myself to a creek. It is just part of my spiritual well-being. I need to be in the woods. I need to be in a creek. If it is seasonably like possible at all, I need to get in it. So being outside is really rewarding for me. It's how I recharge. And I have a 7-year-old daughter who is just incredible. She shows me so much of how I want to be and see in the world. And I'm really lucky to have a husband who's just transformed my understanding of what's possible in a relationship between a man and a woman. He's just really helped me heal and, live the life that I have wanted for myself. We're a really good match in that way, and he's a really beautiful person. So I'm just lucky to be able to kind of recharge with my family and in the place that I'm from. And the other really important thing for me, and part of what drew me to the city when I moved here when I was young, is that I really love creative community. And I'm a weirdo, Teresa. You know this about me. I'm a strange person. So I need to be with artists. I need to, be with the freaks of the world. And I think I find I am most at home between really country people and like the weirdest punk rock music people in a community. And so, like, moving back and forth between those spaces really brings me joy.
So I have to jump back to when we first moved to northern Minnesota and you came and stayed with us. And I'll never forget, we were sitting down at the end of the dock, I think, and you said, "Are there snakes in this lake?" I was like, "What? What?" But you, at that time, I'm trying to remember exactly, but you were dipping in every creek. Your goal was to get in every creek, and remind me a little bit about your goal with that, with water and throwing rocks so those snakes come up. I was just like, "What?"
I know y'all are lucky in Minnesota that you don't have snakes to worry about. Although your water is very cold. I think I jumped in that upper Minnesota like in May, which
It was cold.
was a big idea. I don't think you got in with me. Um,
No.
I have just always loved swimming in natural bodies of water. It's, where I'm most at home, which isn't to say that I'm not afraid. I am a scaredy cat fundamentally. Like my husband likes to sing little songs about thank God she's a country girl as I'm like hollering through the woods. But I still choose it because it's good for me. um, so, I've always loved swimming in natural bodies of water. And when we were first starting rucks, I started this tradition of at the end of every rucks weekend, we would go swim in a natural body of water because it's joyful and you've just held a bunch of complexity and gotten to the bottom of things and people's like not best selves have come to the surface, and you've tried to facilitate them through all of that. And I learned that just like getting back in the car and driving for 3 hours after that didn't feel
Right.
good for anyone. So if we all went swimming afterwards, we would leave feeling like we had exercised every part of ourselves and that we were stronger than we went in. So it was sort of a healing baptism at the end of a rigorous civic engagement in the beginning. And then a few years into it, we were in Harlan County and I had asked Robert Geip to take me to the best swimming hole around, which is Gabe's Branch Falls. Don't put it on. It's on the internet now. Dang. It's already there. If you make the journey, then you deserve to swim there. It's hard to get to. Don't take the long road. Take the short road from the store. Um, anyway, Robert was laughing at me saying that I had started rucks just to swim my way through Kentucky, that I was just trying to get everybody's good swimming holes, which may be true. Maybe that is why I've done all this. But um, yeah, I had started describing it as religious swimming. And everywhere I went, I tried to go swimming, and it's a really beautiful way to see a landscape. You just see a place differently from inside of it.
Absolutely. I'm a huge water person too. I love water. The closer I can be to water, the better. Um, so just another personal question. What are you listening to, reading, watching, in this crazy tumultuous world we're living in right now? Um, you know what are you what are you checking out?
Well, Teresa, the truth is that we're remodeling the cabin that I grew up in. So most of
Uh,
my non-working or parenting time is either like, sweeping up the job site or
right.
scouring Facebook Marketplace for like a discount bathtub situation. But when we're not doing that, I've I found a lot of solace in the poetry of Thomas Merton. And I've been reading a lot of democracy substacks and, trying to understand where the conversation is across the country and, how thought leaders are seeing this moment. And really trying to sit with their analysis and decide what resonates and what doesn't from my experience in Kentucky. So I've been working for about 6 months on an op-ed that'll come out in the Chronicle of Philanthropy,
Oh,
um, which I'm excited to share with you and see what you think. It's partly about our time together and um, my experience of sort of seeing the second Obama administration and Secretary Vilsack's attempt to bring philanthropy in. So I'll share that with you. But um,
I love the poetry side. I think that's an important reflection. And I love what you talked about with Substack and democracy, because it is at your experience and learning. So when you think about moving forward in this world and how do you stay positive? How do you move forward? What gives you hope for the future, I guess is the big piece.
Um, I think there are so many places to draw hope from. I'm really guided by my faith more and more as I get older. I think I've always been a pretty prayerful person, and perhaps sometimes I've been guided by a sort of blind faith of just like jumping and believing that I'm moving in the right direction. But I found some real power in the experience of faith and trying to convey that to my daughter in a way that is less about the sort of structure of religion and more about discovering inside of yourself your sort of direct path to God and knowing that you can get there when you need it. It's like a real challenging thing to impart to a young person. And I think that journey has really helped to solidify and strengthen my own experience of faith. So, that's an important one. And otherwise, it's also just like all of the incredible small acts that are happening all the time, all around us, like small acts of neighborliness that remind me that not only is a new civic future possible, but I think it's likely because I think people um, are tired of atrophying behind their
Hmm.
phones and really longing for one another. And they want to just do something productive in this really divisive, extractive political economy where folks are just profiting off of our pain.
Absolutely. And I would be remiss. I want if you could talk a little bit about this new civic collaboration that you're working on. Please do. Please share about that.
Sure. Do you mean like the pivot in Rux towards investing in our membership? Are you referring to that new Civic Futures letter?
That that Civic Futures letter I saw, of course, but both for sure. But
I mean, they're connected. I
hmm
think we're making that transition in Rux to stop investing in the tool and instead invest in the people who've
people.
learned the tool to utilize it in their own context and to make the party for one another instead of us making the party for them. Right. Um, so it's really like we're moving in that direction with the rural urban exchange because that is what our experience has taught us and because we know we're ready for it. I would still, to any other state in the country, if you don't have a RUX, if you don't have a network of people from across the state who have found a common future in their experiences together, I think that's the first step. I think you have to build that. But eventually, you get to a place where you can invest directly in the people to make the thing that is their version of the RUX in their own context. Um, and it's just such a joyful and exciting prospect. The work of the New Civic Futures collaboration was, well, it's really been stewarded by Sam Pressler, who runs the Connective Tissue blog and is doing a fellowship at UVA. And he, along with Richard Young, who was an early Ruxer, who you know from Rux,
Yes.
who later founded Civic Lex, they brought together about 10 of us from around the country who they saw as um, place-based practitioners who were really guided by um, an ethos that was about a specific place and that was values led. And what we've done for the past year is really share some rigorous conversations about what we think makes this work tick in our context. And through that process, we've come up with 5 foundational principles for civic renewal. And they are, pretty simple concepts. But I think part of what drew us together was that we saw so much money being invested into democracy and civic life since the 2016 election, and very little of that money reaching the ground. Too much of it was sort of studying the potential for this kind of work, and not enough of it was investing in strategies that were already working in the places that they were born. So I think more than ever, with the rise of sort of totalitarianism and fascism, we have to invest in people and places to draw their communities together and build trust at the community level, but also strengthen trust in the capacity for solutions writ large. I think folks have lost a lot of faith that people can do anything to stop these enormous challenges. I think we all agree that people can do everything to stop
Mhm.
the impacts of those challenges in their own communities. And that's where our sort of value of proximity comes in. But I would always argue that proximity is dangerous without interdependence,
Uh,
that
yeah.
you have to really find a way to build both at the same time.
Right. Right.
And that's where the Rux work is headed. And one of the values that I think is really present in this new Civic Futures letter that we issued. So we shared this letter to the field. It's an open letter. We hope, that other practitioners find themselves in these values. The values are participatory, alive, proximate, relational, and generational or durable.
Mm.
It's another way of sort of understanding that this is a generational moment to build durable civic infrastructure that outlasts us. And we think the way to do that is by living those other four core values. So we're having a Civic Power Hour this week. We're having another one in March, and then we're having a gathering in April. So if folks want to learn about it, they can check out newcivicfuture.org.
Absolutely. And I think I love the way you talked about Rux as far as not the investing, you're going from investing in tools to investing in the people. And I would say, just from my personal experience over the last couple of years, I just have seen just amazing how, and especially over the last couple months, how communities have pulled together and are investing in each other. And that gives me hope for the future because it's when you think about our grandmas and our moms and how that that's what it's all about. You need to have that civic infrastructure um, to thrive and survive. And of course, at 100 Bro Women, one of the things that, the reason we really started was because we just did not see enough women in formal leadership roles. Women lead every day. They're leading every day, but they are not necessarily making the policy decisions, the financial decisions, the important community decisions that need to be made. They're not at the table. So when you think about rural women and women in general, what do you think we can do to better support women?
Mm. I think you're right that women learn from women, that we sort of um, learn by watching what other women get away with, what's possible, like how they
Hmm.
build things in unlikely circumstances, how they build contraptions that can circumvent power structures, right? I think women are really visionary, creative leaders, and they find a way to make things possible that shouldn't work.
Hmm.
And the reason that they work is that people come to them and support them relationally. Um, so I think what we can all do to support rural women is one, be out loud supporters of one another.
Yes.
I think especially in small towns, women can be really competitive. I think for a long time, and maybe this is just in the South, I'm not sure, but I think for a long time there could only be a couple of women at the table. And
Absolutely.
so instead of making more space and challenging that paradigm, I think we like folks tried to be that one person. And I think that time's up on that. I think it's time for us to crowd them out.
Right.
Um, and the other is just, I think I think especially, country girls get kind of stuck being this or that. I think it's easy to live in a world of binaries when you haven't seen as many examples of what's possible. Um, and I got some advice years ago from a mentor, Lori Poirier, who's an Oglala
Mm.
Lakota leader in South Dakota, who, when my daughter was born, she gave her um, a beaded turtle pouch for me to put her umbilical cord in. And that's part of the Lakota tradition. I think it's called a kea, which is essentially like grounding the child to their heritage, to their mother, and to the place that they're from. And what Lori told me to tell Sylvia about that pouch is that it's okay to leave. the place that you're from, and it's okay to go home. And I think that's a big piece of it too. When I was growing up, there was this sort of unspoken rule that, like, if you wanted to make something of yourself, you had to leave. But there was, you know, also very little encouragement to do that. Um, I think it's really important that we tell young women that they can go and that we will hold a space for them and that they will still be welcome here when they are different people than they left as.
Yes, 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 and yes. I agree. So, last question that I would like to ask is what advice would you give your younger self? And also, a sort of two-parter. And what advice would you give young girl women trying to navigate right now?
Mm. I think for my younger self, um, I would say that you don't have to prove it. You've already proven it. Um, and that you can trust your instincts, you can trust your voice. Um, and my advice to younger rural women and sort of my advice to myself now and every day is also that um, you don't always have to know the answer and you don't always have to raise your hand when you disagree with something. Sometimes the most powerful thing that you can do is hang back and give someone else the chance to lead in that moment. So maybe that's my growth edge as I turn 40 this year is learning how to give more space to support other women to lead.
It's super good advice and a thing like you say we all need to think about every day. And I love your example too of making room. I mean, at the table too, and what does that look like? And also taking over the table too. I think that's an important piece for women to remember. But is there anything else that you wanted to share, Savannah, today? I'm so appreciative of you taking the time and I hope you know that you're just like spectacular, incredible, and I'd feel so fortunate to know you. So I'm so lucky to know you and know more about you. But even today, I learned a lot more.
Teresa, I'm so indebted to you. Um, I want to ask you a question, if that's okay.
It's not on my script. Just kidding.
um, what have you? What did you learn from the women who mentored you that
Oh,
you're practicing now as you enter the next phase of your career and even deeper
yeah.
mentorship?
Yeah. I think a couple things. One of my early mentors really taught me that you need to figure out how to work across divides. And and I spent, 20 years working at the legislature and I worked in DC. I did a lot of policy stuff, but that has served me well in all the different sectors that I've worked in. But I think that was probably one of the biggest things. And then I think the other thing is that we have to better support each other as women. Because you're right, it can get super competitive, and that's because that's the way the game is. That's what we were raised in. But I think what I learned from mentors is just to watch how they were able to bring people together and how they could support each other as women. And that was a big learning for me. And I love to see young women, I think, are so much more supportive from my perspective, of women than women of my generation. And women of my generation need to get their act together and start supporting young women because I think we were so fortunate um, and have had so many advantages. And now it's time for women who are in careers and who are exiting the careers. They need to figure out how to better support young women because that's where the hope is. That's where the future is for me. And so those are probably things I learned is support each other as women and figure out how to work across divides, whatever those are. And sometimes I just want to go work on my own issues and my own politics and my own things. But sometimes you need to figure out how do I somebody more aware, but how do I become more aware?
Mhm.
And that's a big that's a big thing too. It's like you need to figure out, well, maybe I do need to listen to that and see what people are saying. So I think those are probably my big mentor things are with those divides. You learn from people who you might vehemently disagree with on
Mhm.
many issues. So yeah, that's sort of my blabbing, but that's my piece as I think about my long career and life. But I see women like you, I see women like my daughter, and I just think, you know, you guys are amazing, but we need to better support each other. So that's a big piece that I want to focus on and have been focusing on
Well,
a
I look
lot.
forward to coming to the 100 Rural Women retreat
That's right.
where we
I know
all
we talked about that. We launched in COVID, right as COVID was starting. So, we've never gotten together and I'm starting to get out and meet people now, but we were talking about our morning connections about, okay, we're getting together next summer and we're going to figure it out. So
I said it on the
yeah, that would,
podcast, so it would have to be real, Teresa.
I know. So we got to figure that out. But yeah, but thanks so much for your time, Savannah. And thanks for all you do and for being you. And, yeah, just keep going. And I'm super excited about summer and I want to learn more because we might have to make a trip to Kentucky. So,
Please do.
well,
Yeah, come see us.
okay, I love it. Thanks, Savannah.
Thank you.